You got the pieces and stuff ready to go?
Are we live yet?
We're Now, hey, wow, welcome back to the Cloud Talk Show. We took a little bit of hiatus because, well, life and business and work and stuff. And we have a very, very special guest. This is like, it's almost like the return series. The return of the Stuart. Welcome, Mr. Stuart Williams. Welcome back to the Cloud Talk Show.
Hey, thank you for having me, guys.
Hey, no problem. He's coming from his remote location at some battle station, moon, somewhere in the second quadrant. But as they say, we're still remote. There's still, let's just say, batches of whatever things floating around. But guess what? We can still be virtual, so that's pretty good. Mr. Larry, Uncle Larry, has changed his venue a little bit. I sort of see the same city, but there's something different about it. Tell us about that.
I'm in Brooklyn now. I know. I moved
You're in
from
Brooklyn.
Manhattan. I'm still in New York, yes, but now I'm in Brooklyn. I've got a lot more room.
Okay.
I don't touch the walls anymore.
So you went from one island to another island.
Yeah, just a little bit off.
Okay. All right. So new venue. I'm still in my same lair. I have decided to turn off certain lights to make things a little bit better. Right now, what are we watching right now? Actually, this one is a Sir Larry dedicated this one to Sir Stuart. Let's take a look at this. This is
right. So this is the Isaac Asimov Memorial Debate. They do it yearly. It is Neil deGrasse Tyson. This year's topic is space trash.
Oof.
Right? What is the environmental impact of commercial space exploration? Gonna be cool.
It looks cool. Another fun things to find in the cloud.
Yeah, once in a while find stuff in the cloud. Above the cloud,
above the clouds.
It's above the clouds.
Does it feel like the cloud is like this right now? The internet is like this. It's like all that stuff that's out there. Yeah. Can we say that the internet, maybe, Mr. Stewart, you can actually start off with this one. Is what we see in the internet mostly junk, and only like a couple of pieces that are really in there if we look at its totality?
I think you'd have to define junk a lot more precisely, and whether or not you like cat videos. So
that's true.
I think that the internet, like every public forum throughout history, is a mixture of the very best of us and the very worst. So we see truly great oratories and tomes of knowledge and people with thoughtful opinions. And then we see that weird drunk uncle who you sort of hope doesn't come to the party, but always shows up. So in that respect, I'm not sure it's any better or any worse. I will say, because of just the sheer volume, it can be really hard to sift through the noise to find the signal that it maybe used to be if you were just hanging out at the town square and wandering around and looking at the different soapbox speakers and and you could sort of tell by looking at them, the ones that were wearing their pants on their head, you were kind of like, well, this could be entertainment, but I probably don't predict a lot of factual content. But these days there's a lot of things that look like they're reasonable that totally aren't. And for the record, the rumor about me being a space alien, I have no comment about at this time.
Okay. So this is still unconfirmed, but that's okay. This is the whole point. Do
We
your
cannot
research, as
confirm.
they say.
We cannot confirm or deny, as the matter is currently under investigation by the authorities.
Well, this is true.
So,
Go
Please
ahead.
don't probe me.
Like curation is one way to get around that, and we
That's
deal with
right.
that all the time, right? You really need people involved, because all of the automated things that we've tried lead to bad things, like the echo chambers that Facebook turned into.
Right.
You know, polarizing.
We always hope that at some point AI will help sort the signal from the noise, but AI does what it's told, and they also tend to get themselves into sort of Mobius-Hofstadter loops. Witness the dramatic failure of facial recognition as a platform, not identifying, for example, people of color as being people at all. But the other thing is that there are algorithms that do that people have been working on, and the outcome of the algorithm and its usefulness, and more importantly, I think its fairness, is entirely a function of the training set, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So,
there
are
a lot of good books about. I mean, I look back. It's not just racial as well. There's the fact that before I think it's the late 80s, maybe even early 90s, all cars were deadly for women because they did not have female body representation in the crash test dummies.
In the crash test, yeah.
They were all male.
And in fact, in general, it wasn't just women, it was anyone who was outside of the envelope of 5'9" to 6'1", and weighing between a certain weight range, which I won't say for matters of delicacy, because the crash test dummies didn't have that kind of variation. So, if you were a large framed individual or a small framed individual, regardless of gender, they didn't take that into account. And yet the sort of standard crash test dummy, this is an example of a training set leading you astray. The standard crash test dummy represented a very specific body type with different joint proportions and very specific relationship to the control surfaces and the seat. But when they did a population study and said, well, how typical is that, right? What they discovered was that first, body shapes and sizes and the periographics, that is the distance between joints and things, wasn't necessarily a constant, that just scaling up and scaling down didn't do it. But also that it's not a normal distribution, right? And the testing was based on a bias towards a normal distribution. And we know these days, because of better statistical analysis and chaos theory, that in fact, things like the variation in human frames and sizes are actually more likely to be a Poisson or some other complex distribution than they are the normal curve. And the normal curve has probably done more harm than good in the frame of human interactions with the real world, right? I'm not saying the normal distribution isn't useful. It absolutely is. But the assumption of a normal distribution is more and more, we're finding it's not necessarily so.
Right. And that's a natural, that distribution feels natural to the brain. And so that's why people, it's not that people were bad necessarily, right? Going out of their way to do bad things, but they did not understand, or they didn't take into account the underlying complexity.
It's unconscious. It was, in a sense, it's unconscious.
It's not only an unconscious bias, but it's also something called the bias to simplicity. That is to say,
There we go.
You can explain a normal curve to pretty much anyone. If you give them one of those ball shaking devices with the balls up at the top and the pegs, no, the balls will go into a normal distribution. And people kind of get that. But the physics of the real world are very rarely do you find things that are normally distributed. If you have a cloud full of rain or a cloud full of data, and you rain it down upon a surface, a projection, what you get isn't even remotely normally distributed. But it's not necessarily random either. Right? So parenthetically, humans have a bias towards randomness being evenness. And we talked about training sets again. That shows up in a lot of AI things that would help us reduce the signal to the noise. But just because there's evenness doesn't mean it's random. And the other thing is, it doesn't mean it's representative.
True.
So there's this thing called a bias to fairness. And the way it was, Aaron Sorkin had a brilliant explanation of this. He's the famous TV writer.
Right.
And he said, if political party A said the world was an oblate spheroid, and political party B said that the earth was flat and carried on the back of a giant turtle, right? That the news headline would read, Party A and Party B can't agree on shape of Earth. And not scientific evidence shows that Party A is more likely to be correct about the Earth's shape, right? Because there's an unconscious bias to fairness, and that shows up in the technology world that we operate in, the cloud, in all kinds of unpleasant ways.
Giving equal time to unequal arguments,
right,
is what we're seeing in a lot of our modern life.
Well, we get that a lot. It's sometimes even just in very basic things. Someone like putting in requirements. It's like, well, here's a requirement for something that has to happen with this solution, and says, well, hold on a second. That requirement has nothing to do with the solution. Why is it in there? It's because someone thought that they go together. It's like, well, hold on a second. Your bias has brought that in. Can we discuss that? Because the act of putting that stuff in sometimes just either increases the cost or makes let's say the outcome vague. My big beef is when the outcome is vague because of whatever you decided to throw in there because you thought you were being thorough. Suddenly you've just made it muddy, right? Well, we want to be clear. The less you got, folks, the less you got, the easier it is for us to build it the way you want it.
Well, the other thing is there's this assumption that system behaviors are smooth with scale, right? We have 10 servers doing things. When we go to 100 servers, or in my case, I'm on a project with tens of thousands of computing nodes. And what we've discovered is, of course, that the assumption of scale will throw more at it, and the behavior will stay the same, just in proportion.
Right.
It's fundamentally wrong, right? And then there's the assumption, especially in messaging systems, that all messages are created equal, to Larry's point, right? That every single data point or message or piece of data is equivalently weighted in our business domain, right? Again, it's a callback to the bias towards fairness. And yet, as we scale these big data sets, particularly data sets that will become training sets for artificial intelligence, those unconscious biases make the model diverge from the real world very quickly. And the larger the training set, it's not exponential, it's geometric with the number of covariables, without getting too math brainy.
We brought you here for math, sir.
Levers there are, the less likely it is to be normally distributed,
yes,
the less likely it is to laminarly scale, and the more that the rule of chaos theory, that tiny changes in the starting conditions impact the outcomes, becomes a bigger and bigger deal, right? And my complaint with a lot of, for example, large system testing is they say, well, we're going to run the same test cases with the same data over and over and over again. because we need apples to apples comparisons, and that's not wrong. What's wrong is stopping there, right? It is correct but insufficient.
I like it. Yeah,
the missing piece.
And I do, and I'm sorry, excuse the background noise here.
They're
I
coming
do
to take him away.
Oh, now we can tell where you are.
Yeah. So one thing though, you talk about data and training sets, and I want to bring something up that's interesting, and I've had conversations around it. I want to get your take on it. We have tainted data sets that are out there in the world right now.
Yes.
Right? We have data sets that were obtained illegally and distributed, but the people who use them in good faith. What is the recourse for that? Because once you've trained a model on a data set, you can't really
can't undo it. You can't untrain it. You can't unsee it.
And I think the correlation to that problem, right, is suppose you have a known to be good data set, in the sense that the data in the data set is both accurate and precise, that the distribution of use cases within the data is reasonably representative of whatever you're trying to model, right? Mm-hmm. The question is, are there ethical and non-ethical uses for that data? And of course, the number one example we're all living through right now is Cambridge Analytica's acquisition of data, which may or may not have been shady, to your point. That's still under adjudication, right? But let's assume that it wasn't shady. Let's assume that the data was reasonably unbiased and was a representative, legitimate sample with unevenness and variation and all those things. And then you turn around and use it to craft, for lack of a better word, fictitious or facetious arguments to get people to change their behavior. Is that an ethical use of the data? So even if the source of the data is ethical, is it ethical to use it to steer public opinion? And this is actually a harder question than people think it is. Let's take something that I think we all agree is a bad thing: junk in space. Right? Junk in space is bad. Why? Because we launch very expensive things that are meant to provide business and global human value, and then they get eaten by a piece of junk, right? So you could argue that if you were trying to convince a subset of the decision makers to take the issue of space junk seriously and to actually act on that, right? Would it be ethical to use a data set about those individuals, their biases, their preferences, their patterns, habits, what we call demi-quantitative, preference data? Would it be ethical to use that data for a justifiably good use? Right.
And
then when does it end, and who decides?
Right. Use it to scare someone. You should for scaring.
When does Larry say, you know what, I don't really want to be in that data set, even though I know that removing myself will change the population bias of that data?
Oh, wow.
I want out, right? Which I think is arguably a fundamental human right, the right to opt out of data collection. And that's where you see GDPR and the European Union and lots of other, Canada, Brazil, they're all getting very serious about it. And then you see the exact opposite, right? In China, they're all about data collection, and they're using it to incentivize citizenship, for lack of a less polite.
A civic duty, or maybe would be the word.
But
their duty
to the state. To incentivize certain behaviors and disincentivize others in the name of having a homogeneous, stable, and they argue, safer society, right?
For productive. Yeah.
Well, predictable society. Anyone when there's prediction, when you can predict stuff, you are safer because you know. Even if what you know is something bad going to happen, I feel safer because I know that's what's going to happen. It should be. It could be a bad thing. It could be a good thing. Doesn't matter. I feel better that I know.
And again, humans have these built-in cognitive biases that are hardwired into our neurochemistry, and neurophysiologists have actually figured out where in the brain these circuits are and how they work. And in fact, they study people who have certain kinds of behavioral disorders as a subset, and then they compare it to the standard model of humans. And what they're trying to do is figure out, is there a way we could fix the wiring of a person who feels like their biases, their cognitive judgments are being influenced in a way that they themselves do not like, right? You know, as a personal choice, I'd rather not be obsessive about this thing. And I'm obsessive about it because I have a particular wiring or cognitive data set in my brain. And I'm going to choose for myself to let someone modify that to result in my happiness, right? Where is the trade-off there? And the same thing happens with these enormous data sets that are out in the world that we've seen used for good, but we've also seen them used for very, very bad.
Yep.
And not just in politics, right? They inform consumer behavior, they inform voter attitudes, they, they have a bias. There's
social attitudes that change
for
because of
something
that.
called setting up the big lie, which is always a combination of things that sound, and as a logician, right, there's a bunch of math that goes with this, but basically if you take something that for all intents and purposes is either slightly true within a given set of circumstances or is plausibly true, and you repeat it enough times and you use that as the foundation upon which to build things that are not provably true. Something called Pascal's conundrum, by the way.
Or what do they call it? People say, those guys talk about this. They say, those folks.
Yeah. And that's the delivery mechanism, right? But as a mathematician, as a logician, what we say is it's the weak premise problem, right?
Yes.
And then, those things pile on each other, and what you get is a result that you may or may not have desired as the procedure implementer, but may or may not be good for society, the world, whatever as a whole.
Right.
And so the ethical conundrum is, for these large training sets, how do you tell whether or not they're biased, and how do you then label the data set in such a way that the biases are obvious? And there's a bunch of mathematicians around the world and logicians working on how do we analyze a data set, identify its biases, label it, and say there are certain problem domains for which this data set would give realistic, and we can't use the word fair because fairness is a bias, but that you could, through inductive logic, conclude that your conclusion based on the data is factually true.
Yes, truth over fairness. Yep.
And what's great about that is once they get that labeled, well, one thing that we have to do is we have to come up with a mechanism to surface that so that it's visible. But as soon as you label that data, and I put it into Power BI, I can use it for something completely different.
And you could misuse it.
And misuse it.
Yeah.
Not purposefully, but because I don't have enough knowledge.
Or you just influenced it with your humanness. It's like the machine did all this work, and what did you do? You had to be human. What the?
And by the way, this is not
developer, right? The citizen developer is great.
Yeah.
Until.
And there's the thing that the business asks the developer to do something, we have a data set that we could use to do it, but where's the ethical line between, I think the outcome you're trying to get to is over some ethical line, and what are those lines? If your goal is to understand, I think you can completely justify. Anytime the goal is to genuinely understand something, I think that's probably an ethical use. But when you start to use it to change or influence behavior of systems or people, then I think there has to be an ethical conversation, right?
Yes.
Yeah, well, and I think that kind of leads to something interesting. In Canada, they have the iron rings, right? They have engineers that go through a process and have this board of ethics and do things like that. We don't have that in the United States.
No.
And
they have that in Scandinavia too, right?
Pardon?
Yes, I've heard that.
They have that in Scandinavia. In other words, there are political entities around the world, both corporates and polities, that have said, we want to use data within a set of ethical frameworks, and that there's a certain amount of, I think Ralph said it earlier, or you said it earlier, about curation, right?
Yes.
That curation is more than just the data set that you're using. It's the use you're using it for.
Right.
And the conclusions that you are allowed to draw from the analysis is this. You can always draw conclusions from any data set about anything you want if you're willing to statistically stretch. By the way, this is not a new thing. People have been debating this issue as far back as the 800s. There was an Italian monk who coincidentally also invented double entry bookkeeping. His name was
I think I know this story. Yes.
But he said, the thing about looking at financial records is, first, you have to ask yourself if the entries are actually genuine. Secondly, you have to ask whether or not the entries represent real value of a thing, whether it's a service or a product or whatever. And the third thing is you have to ask, once you're using that to do forecasting, let's say this business is worth investing in because their books look good, to what extent are you able to predict the future? And he actually found something very interesting that was later verified by a mathematician who sadly died very young named Euler, that said the further in the future you are predicting, the more accurate your prediction is likely to be. And that predicting things on the short term is the reason why, among other things, the world has yet to produce a single trillionaire from the stock market. Because of chaos theory, we're pretty sure that's nearly impossible, which makes those people basically gamblers. But we gamble with data all the time, right? But we don't articulate that we're gambling, and that's where the ethical dimension,
right there. That's right there. So even gamble, like a lot of the theories that we get, a lot of the things. And here's the thing: when you're studying it, it's okay. It's when you're, let's just say, using it for nefarious purposes is the issue. Sometimes when we're trying to solve something, just looking at gambling theories or how like that stuff works is great for solving a problem, but not necessarily for an action or that trigger. I call it the trigger. Essentially, I'm going to use something. I'm going to use my solution to trigger something. If I'm going to use it to understand, that hurts only the person who doesn't want to see the answer, basically. But if it's going to trigger something, that is where the power and responsibility comes in. As they say, with great power and great data and all that.
Well, but we're all elderly, right? Statesmen.
We are.
For the
Yeah, that's right, whippersnappers.
Right, we do.
Yeah, I turned 60 this month, so I'm right there.
Oh my gosh!
Congratulations!
I'm just a few months behind you, sir.
But we we are supposed to be leading and mentoring the young of this profession, right?
Yes.
We're leading large enterprise projects, and we are trying to guide enterprises in the right way. And you know, we're friends because we all know that we're doing it ethically. But is there and should there be within the United States some sort of governing body that that can step in and help?
So the question is it help or, let's just say curate?
Well, train,
Right.
provide guidance, because and what are the responsibilities of someone in our position?
What would be a model for guidance? I'm trying to think of something in our government that would be a model for guidance, because most everything, they're executive nature, right? Everyone executes something, does something.
The other thing about any kind of governance or guidance organization is the tension between the political of the moment, the tactical, and long-term continuity, which is why some American institutions like the Supreme Court and federal judges are nominated for life.
Right.
And it takes a lot to boot one off because, that represents organizational stability.
Or it should have.
Right. Whereas there are lots of local government things that are not only so ephemeral, they're almost ineffective, but there's no continuity of strategy.
Right.
So how do you build a governance organization, whether it be in the country, which is a way bigger problem, or just like within your organization, within your company, right? How do we build data governance and data curation and the ethical uses of data and the rules, and who reviews that? Who's in that group? Who isn't? Is it a consensus model? Is it, what you don't want it to be probably is a star chamber, but you don't want it to be so volatile that there's no continuity of ethical, threads that, there's a determination. And those governance organizations are often very difficult to build. And like all organizations, of course, they tend to fall into the traps that we talked about at the start of the show about cognitive biases, right? A biasness towards fairness, a bias towards the normal distribution, a bias of evenness against randomness, and so on. So there is a certain educational component, right, that has to go into serving in one of those bodies.
Right.
But you certainly wouldn't want a bunch of academics like me being the only representative. Because we'll just do the math and go, and yet there may be a legitimate, there may be a reasonable business case that falls something short of an absolute logician's ethical line that is to the advantage of the business, and the purpose of the corporate entity is to make money, right?
Right.
And so, is big e-commerce companies' use of your personal data to suggest that people who bought also liked, right? Is that ethical? Probably, because it's your choice to cart it or not, right? They don't auto cart it for you.
Right.
So where is that? And I think that data sets that impact large numbers of people need perhaps more scrutiny in their use, right, than data sets that affect relatively small populations. Although there is an example in the United States where there is a fairly small sample population, but the individuals are profoundly impacted. There are a number of them.
Right.
One, of course, is our indigenous populations, right? That the rules and governance and things like that has potentially unexpected negative outcomes for them. I'm being charitable here.
Right.
But there are also other far less obvious populations. For example, most of the people in government are of the middle to upper middle class because they're the ones that can afford to run for election and serve. And
Right.
so disproportionately, the working class and the poor tend to get underrepresented, right, in lawmaking. And it's a well-known problem, like that people like Common Cause and others are trying to work on.
Right.
But it's a matter of how do you detect that bias is happening by looking at the available data set, in this case, the body of US law, right, which is public and available. It's an enormous data set.
Yep.
How do we go and do the analysis of those data sets and label them, like we talked about what their built-in biases are, and then have a conversation as a society about curation and about fair use and about potentially modifying the training set, right? I mean, that's
well, and
it's essentially sitting on the couch and saying, okay, it's okay to talk about your mom. You know, how did you feel about that? It's looking inside themselves. Sometimes just that breakthrough. We haven't yet reached that breakthrough. We're still, every time we try, it's like it hurts, and someone just storms out of the chair, or it seems like they're storming out of the chair every time we try to take a deeper look. It almost feels like we need to have that governance. That's why people perhaps tend to look for governance that is, and I wouldn't say tyrannical. What's the word I'm looking for? Authoritarian. They want somebody to like just tell them what to do already, because like I can't think. I don't want just tell me what to do.
Well, and humans are in the main not comfortable with ambiguity, particularly if that human is embedded in a hierarchical organization like a corporation.
Yes.
Because if I take something under advisement, but I have choice, now I'm going to be held responsible. If I'm given an authoritarian answer, even if I disagree, I can go, they said, right?
Exactly. Well, I did it. Hey, I did what they told me.
So if we look at all of these reforms, though, I think that too many people get hung up on absolutes in the reform, and don't really meet the standards that we do, that I try to do every time, you know, that I know that we all try to do for enterprises, which is get 80 to 90% of the solution in place.
Right.
And not worry about those outliers that we can, you know, mechanical Turk, right? We leave room in there for people.
Yes, not kill the thing just because that one piece didn't go over it. Exactly. To over-engineer, you kill it, or you go through and make like a blanket, like, well, this is no good. This is not what we wanted right off the bat. Think it through.
Or you get so wrapped up around the axle, right?
Right.
That you suffer from analysis paralysis and are unable to decide, unwilling to change, is what Voltaire said. Remember, but in French, I can't do French. I won't do it on your show because the French among you will come and get me.
Well, but we didn't have any French words so far, surprisingly. Right? So yeah.
Unwilling to decide, unable to change.
Yes. Exactly. That's the part. In fact, this is usually, in a lot of cases, what I'm doing a lot of lately is because I'm now straddling the so-called low code area. And I say so-called because the idea of what low code is, and when I explain to folks, look, low code is just high code where they already did the work for you and you're starting at this point. You know, because and they say, what's the difference between that? It's like, well, if you had to start from scratch, yeah, that's quote unquote high code to get there. And basically, if you've gotten all that and you did the work, what you should be doing from this point out should be quote unquote low going forward. So now people are like, well, how do I decide if something is low code or high code? Well, guess what? It's your little envisioning thing requires you to actually know what you have already versus what you need. If you don't know what you have, and then you're stuck trying to analyze the nuances of what you have because you don't even understand what you've got, then you can't even start. You can't do low code at all if you don't understand what you have.
Well, the thing is, I find the debate. Yeah. I find the low code, high code debate to be a little Pyrrhic in some ways.
It is.
Because the advantage to high code is ultimate flexibility and choice. As you go towards low code, you pick up prescription, right? Through frameworks, through tooling, through your piece goes in this shaped hole and only in this shaped hole, right? And there's value to be had all along that continuum. But to your point, Ralph, is if you don't know what your use cases are and what your data is, you can't pick where to be on that continuum in a certain way.
Yes. So that's the point. And a lot of the discussions is like we make them think through what it is that you actually have. What do you know? What do you understand? Is it really what it is? You think you know, because maybe it's not. You looked at it at the end, the pieces of the elephant, right? All the parts. It's like, well, hold on a second. Did you take off your blindfold? Oh, we had an elephant all this time? Well, yeah, that's what it was.
H.L. Mencken said it best. He said, without, and I'm paraphrasing, without an understanding of the situation, then you are not a rational actor. You are a member of a cult, right? You have subordinated your judgment to the judgment of the masses. And that may or may not have the outcome that is good by any measure of good. But the thing is that for all good outcomes, and this is another Voltaire thing, for all good possible outcomes, there are always an equal number of bad outcomes, but numeracy is not weight. So when we're trying to discover a set of ethical rules for how to do any of these things, high code, low code, proper uses of data, artificial intelligence, anything, we have to say, we can't just say this is the stuff in the good column, this is the stuff in the bad column. We have to assign weights or values to those that are expressive of both goals and societal values or corporate values as a whole, right?
Right. Magnitude of good, magnitude of bad.
So, yes, magnitude matters. In fact, I'm going to make that into a bumper sticker, and you guys can sell it on your channel.
Let's find out if anyone took that one already. Here we go. Magnitude matters. Let's go see what's going on. Oh, look, there's magnitudematters.com. Someone beat you to it.
It's too bad.
The false law of conservation and effort. Hey, this looks interesting. And look, this is recent. May 15th.
Yes, but I think they're ripping off Voltaire there, but that's okay.
I think so. So wow, look what you can find on the internet these days.
I'm saying I'm glad someone's actually read it.
Oh, there we go.
So I love the fact that you bring up cults, because so many times, and especially smaller enterprises, we see so many kind of cargo cult programmers, cargo cult architects that are not situationally aware and are building the same structure that they've seen someone else build and succeed with.
Right.
And that's,
hey, sometimes
you were talking about the role of those of us who are of a mature age and judgment. I think that the one of the most important things that we can impart is context matters, use cases matter, and goals matter, and that there isn't a magic formula for grinding out a system or a set of analytics or whatever. There isn't a one size fits all. Use cases matter, right? Intention matters, goals matter, cost matters, right? And that, being so flexible that you're completely paralyzed is one thing, but the company we all used to work for, famously, one of our leaders had a saying, "Semper Gumby," right? It was flexible, and it's the willingness to look at a new problem with new eyes and ask new questions, and say, and of course, should you reach into your bag of tricks and go, would this work for my use case? What are the pluses and minuses, right? I'm not saying that's valueless. It's not. What I'm saying is you should start from there. Somebody famously described the perfect enterprise architect like a sculptor who takes a block of marble and chips away all the things it should not be, and whatever's left is the trade-off inside the iron triangle that meets the business requirements, right? And I think that's our value as older.
I would agree.
Too many times we're asked to begin implementing before the solution is defined.
Right.
I mean, even in Agile, you have to have a solution in mind before you can begin implementing that solution. And whether it's high code or low code, implementation doesn't solve problems.
Right.
And a symptom of that that I get asked like 4 times a day for real is, what do you think of XYZ, library, technology, tool, whatever? And I go, what do you plan to use it for? And they're like, stuff. And I'm like, I'd like some more specifics, please. Because, I mean, there are tools that are completely dreadful from beginning to end or whatever. For example, I have yet to find a valid use case for dividing by 0. Now, that just may be me, but within the rest of the real world continuum, things either are good fits for a set of use cases or they're not.
Right?
It's absolutism that, again, I think I like your phrase cargo cult. Like, reproduce applications that are built this way and they're always built this way, and because we've always built them this way and we always will build them this way, and and everybody understands them, so they're easy to have governance and no one has to actually engage any of the little gray cells.
That's right.
And that gives me hives. But the teams that come to me and say, hey, we started coding last Tuesday, we want to release this now, make me go, wait, because I fear they have treaded the other direction precipitously.
Indeed.
So the real benefit, the real value that good enterprise architects bring to the table is that we're constantly doing Pareto optimization. And we're constantly adjusting the measures that we're using based on input from the business and input from the community and the industry. And, we're constantly, though, searching for a solution that is optimal enough, right? There is not a best. Anyone that tries to sell you a product, just in general, and say it is the best, it absolutely works for everyone, they're lying.
Yes.
It is a lie.
Well, the correlation to the Pareto rule that all 3 of us were taught and we used to lecture about is great is the enemy of good.
Yes.
Right?
This is true.
Because the iron triangle is real, and I'd rather deliver something on budget, on time, that does 80% of what the business wanted, which is probably what they needed in the first place.
Yep. Yeah, the idea also is the journey is like, it's okay to aim for great, but you must be prepared for good. In fact, you should really expect good, feel good about good, but aiming for great, there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong.
Well,
okay, we need a bumper sticker. Feel great about good.
Good.
Ralph Rivas.
There we go. I think we're going to put that one into a text.
I'm constantly having to tell my son to study to get an A.
Yep.
Because he is studying to get a C, and when he misses, he gets a D or an F.
Right.
As opposed to getting a B or a C.
Yeah, exactly. At least if you miss, you're going to not miss too far. If you happen to get it and you get lucky, well.
There's a difference between aspiring to greatness and working to greatness, and then celebrating that you got to good, as opposed to it's good enough, right?
Yep.
Because then you've slightly undershot. And actually going back to data sets and biases in data sets, right?
Right.
One of the things that is really annoying that causes data paralysis is this data set is not ready because it's not great yet. Well, if you understand the ways in which it failed to be great, in other words, you understand the biases in the data set, then you can make an articulation about what use cases it's probably not good for. It's probably easier to do that than make articulations about what it is good for, and say, here's a data set, use it with caution. It's probably good at these things. It's probably less good at those things.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding the biases and the quality issues in the data set allows you to make an informed decision.
That's the battle right there, right? And then at some point, you just keep realizing that's the whole point, right? It's this, nothing is ever maybe totally ever really finished. There will be some version of it that's going to follow later on. I mean, that's how life is. Yeah. That's how the universe grows.
Well, and you know, change. if we were architects of buildings, right? The second day of architecture school, they say, if you think the thing you're building, a bridge, a building, whatever, is done, you've completely ignored the fact that at some point someone's going to have to climb up on a ladder and change some light bulbs, right? So making systems that are maintainable is an investment in guarding against the boundaries or the limits of being Pareto, right? Because if you're 80% of the way there, but now it's rigidly cast in whatever you cast it in, and there's no opportunities for tweaking, right? One of the reasons, by the way, I'm a big fan of evolutionary database design and domain-driven design is because they help you as an architect ask the right kinds of questions and realize that the thing that you design and tell the developers to implement are going to be 80% if you're lucky, right? And then 2 years from now, the business could have gone over there, and we need to be able to roll with it without having a complete freak out.
And starting over, yeah, and exactly.
I've built enough shelfware in my career. I have an allergy to it now, right? I mean,
shelfware. Oh man, shelfware is one of our favorite things. Shelfware, and for the youngins, shelfware is the stuff that's been created that goes in the shelf and you never see it again. Sometimes you'll see stuff behind us. Well, maybe not right now because we're not showing our hidden layers. There's stuff over here that'll be like, what? That's so old, no one would ever use that again. You're right. That's shelfware right there.
But then again, there's software that was written, 30 years ago that's still running businesses today.
Yeah.
And knowing
and it succeeds for one of two reasons.
And it succeeds.
Right?
Yep.
It's either so freaking impenetrable that the business can't change its procedures because the software won't let it, or the 80% use case, the use case we aspire to, that is, we started out with a series of good ideas that we were able to tweak over time and let the business grow and change and evolve. And we were able to grow and change and evolve the software with it. And we also did the required maintenance, which means, run times, language updates, library updates, security things, right? It makes me crazy when I see estimates for software projects, and they talk about year one, but they don't talk about year N because it's not realistic.
Yes, right. They got to have the plan. The whole thing is, that's why the life cycle management, there's a reason why it's a thing. Life cycle management is the idea is when we look at things, and actually ALM is almost like I'm still finding out that today ALM is not so much an afterthought, but not so much. It's like, we just want to get this done. That's too expensive. We don't want to try that right now. Let's just get this over with, and then maybe later we'll figure out how to automate it, figure out what's going to happen later, and we just want to get this done right now. It's like, well, here's the thing. If you go through that and you miss out on that opportunity to, like, just say future-proof, I don't know, there's another way to put it, at least to think it through. So, I would usually say in those cases, well, sign over here in blood that you said, I will not look at that. Okay, so that when 2 years from now you came over here, remember that? You signed over here that you didn't want to look at that. What do we got right now? Oh.
And it's telling, right, that the good folks at OWASP, and I'm a member, for the first, for the second time in a row, they update every couple of years, right?
Yes.
The number one thing was vulnerable components, because you put in a library or put in a component or put in a widget, whether you wrote it yourself or it's somebody else's, it doesn't matter. And you never look at it again, right? You never ask, is this still secure? Does it still compute correctly? Has the data that it's getting it changed? So is it producing a false friend result? It's producing what you expect, but it's not producing what truth is. And there's a very large DIY company that 5 years ago made me have to change my credit card because they failed to maintain a single component. And the component, it wasn't even a 0-day vulnerability. It was a long known vulnerability they did nothing about, and they ended up compromising more than 500,000 credit card numbers, right?
Smack. Here you go.
So see, that brings me to think about, I'm personally very glad that I've never built software that runs pacemakers or, any medical, straight up
airplanes.
Yeah.
Diagnostics.
You guys had better hope I'm a damn fine engineer, because my software is running on airplanes.
That's right. That's why I've mentioned that for that reason.
Take the train.
But the problem is,
is
today with our interconnectivity, it doesn't matter. Every piece of software you write can lead to that pacemaker, can lead to, a vulnerability in this, can be leveraged to move into this system. So it's tough.
And
how do you do it, Stuart?
My favorite story about that is there's a big famous appliance company that tried to do a really good thing. They tried to Internet of Things enable their refrigerator because, one, it could be the family center for messages and time and weather, and that's great. But they had a little barcode scanner inside the door, and so when someone took out the milk and the milk was gone, they could bleep, hit the button and bleep bleep, and then it would go on the shopping list. But in order to make some of the features work, they had to enable near field networking. And because it was a freaking refrigerator, they didn't spend a lot of time thinking about security, because among other things, you weren't allowed through software to change the temperature inside the fridge. That was still a manual. So they thought, what could be the consequences? Well, it turned out that a certain device manufacturer that starts with J had enabled near field networking to monitor exactly what you said, pacemakers, but more importantly, insulin pumps. And if you owned a certain brand of insulin pump that is vital to your body's continued existence as a corporeal entity, and that refrigerator, you inadvertently left yourself open to biohackers and ransomware of your insulin pump.
Oh my God. Wow.
Embedded
that's
device. That's a different kind of embedded device.
But what Larry's talking about is that the interconnectivity creates new opportunities for both awesomeness and oh-no-ness.
Oh-no-ness. That's gonna be a new one. Oh-no-ness. I think we're gonna have to hold it off there on the oh-no-ness, only because my next thing happens to be where we have to talk people out of continuing to use SSRS and moving on to something new.
Yes.
Remember SSRS,
Power
right?
BI. Power BI is your friend.
Yeah. So we're trying to explain. Hey, but for now, could we just keep it there for a few more years, a little bit? Can we stretch it? So I now need to go make that case.
I supported SSRS for a while.
Yeah.
I've got great love for SSRS.
Hey,
but yeah,
I got my chops in there.
In its day, right?
Yes.
It was the best of a bunch of terrible options, and it came free with your SQL Server license, right? No, seriously. It was the best tool available. But I would no more take SSRS into battle in the corporate world today than I would take the Sion tank into battle against the Russian army, right? Because a World War I tank isn't going to get it done.
Yep.
against the T-34. It's just not.
No,
that might come up today.
All right.
All right.
Well,
So,
look, this has been a great
Raquel, let's
hour.
sign us out over here. We're gonna have a nice little send off from Mr. Stewart, but we're gonna have to have you back for number 3 because we're not done. We're not done with you yet.
Oh heck, are we ever done? I mean,
No, we're never done. Exactly. This is the point. Wow, that's our team. We're not done. All right.
Hey, thank you for having me on. This is a fun conversation, and I think we covered a lot of really important areas.
Oh boy, this is one of our cool shows. So we're gonna be marking it on the cool show label, because we're biased. But hey,
sure,
that's the way it works.
There's a certain amount of sampling bias when all the people on your show are your friends, but yeah,
that's true. Thanks for the samples.
It's not a bad not all sampling biases are bad. That's the important thing. There's a purpose, a set of dimensions, and a set of use cases. That's what I'm saying.
Indeed. Okay, Raquel, sign us out. And I'm going to hang up very quickly because they're meeting. I hear the beeps. Folks, and we're out. All right.